Right. No one
Here we go.
Didn't someone think that you might want to model this?
They wouldn't die.
It's funny as political scientists are studying on the part here that you could get right and somebody presenting what happened. They'd be like, you assume I know can you work on
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of.
How are you? Good to see you too.
All right.
Did you move to your new?
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for coming tonight. I'm Scott Morgenstern, the director of the Center for Latin American Studies here at Pitt, and one of two co-hosts for the conference. It's called Reforming Communism, Cuba in Comparative Perspective, that we're kicking off today. My co-host is Jerome Branch, hiding in the back right there. He'll give part of the introduction tomorrow, but gave me the wonderful task of tonight. Two quick things on logistics. Is that the conference starts in the other building in Passpar tomorrow morning early in 3911 Passpar Hall. And for the invitees, the conference participants, the dinner that you've been invited to is downstairs. And that's the conference participants. Okay. Tonight we're going to open our conference by welcoming our keynote speaker, Carmelo Mesa-Lago, to offer a review of the changes that have been taking place in Cuba. And I know that he'll also emphasize the challenges that Cuba faces as it moves forward. But before getting to the people who will formally introduce Professor Mesa-Lago, let me take just a minute to note what we'll be doing for the next 2 days. Our idea for this conference grew from a central goal of our center for breeding cross-disciplinary discussions. This goal was encouraged by the major grant we won for this conference from Pitt's Global Studies Center. Thank you, Nancy Condi, who's in the back. Under a program that's funded by the provost, who's also here with us tonight, and I'll introduce in a couple of moments, hiding over there. Their GAP grant, which is the Global Academic Partnership, requires the conferences that they sponsor cut across disciplinary lines. Since I'm in political science, I sought out Jerome, who's in Hispanic literature and languages and literature, to make the discussions as broad as possible. And I've been very glad that we've been able to work together so well on this. I also want to acknowledge the support of the Center for Latin American Studies, USIS, that's the University Center for International Studies, the Departments of Hispanic Languages and Literature, and Political Science. Also GISPIA, that's the Graduate School in Public and International Affairs, and the Cuban Studies group also supported this. I know that the Dean of the Dietrich School is here today, John Cooper. I saw you come in. There you are. Thank you very much also for support of our center and for this conference. And we should acknowledge that really the support from the provost and the dean makes these kind of programs possible. It wouldn't be possible to do this without them. And lastly, we need to thank Sophia Vera. Is she here in the room? There she is, from our Department of Political Science, who's been a great help for coordinating this conference, and Diana Shemensky, who all of you have come to know, without whom none of this would be possible. Thank you very much. For the next 2 days, we'll be discussing Cuba from a comparative perspective. Cuba has implemented some surprising reforms in the past few years, and more is promised, including the announced resignation of Raul Castro for 2016. The international context has also changed, such that support for the embargo, even in Miami, has weakened dramatically. We propose that for these 2 days, we will not only discuss these specific reforms, however, instead we'll try to put them into a comparative perspective so that we can think about how other countries have dealt with reforms away from authoritarian political systems and socialist economies. We'll also use the comparative framework to analyze leftist politics around the world and how they continue to change. To begin what I think promises to be a fascinating couple of days. We have our longtime colleague, Carmelo Mesa-Lago, who was a primary shaper of the Center for Latin American Studies and who served as our director for 12 years, from 1974 to 86. To formally introduce him, I've asked two people who know him well to speak. But before I do that, before I introduce PITT's provost, Pat Gieson, and Carmelo's longtime co-author, Jorge Perez-Lopez, I want to make an important announcement. Carmelo and his wife Elena, who's also here, have given a very significant gift to our Center for Latin American Studies. And with that, we are creating the Carmelo and Elena Mesa-Lago Fund. This fund will extend into perpetuity Carmelo's legacy by supporting research in or about Cuba and or about social welfare assistance in Latin America. We at the Center are extremely excited about this gift for three reasons. First, while Carmelo's name is already cemented through his 93 published books, one just last year, happy birthday by the way, the fund will encourage younger scholars to recognize Carmelo's long and extensive contribution to the study of Cuba and social welfare systems. Second, the fund will help us to reinforce our interest in these topics, which have been such an important part of our center's history. And third, the fund will support, again in perpetuity, deserving graduate students. In recognition of this gift, we've designed a special plaque that we hope Carmelo and Elena will accept. We made two copies, one for them to hang in our offices, and one for them to take home. Carmelo and Elena would like to. It's heavy. Don't drop it on yourself. Show everybody else. The plaque describes a bit of Carmelo's career and thanks him and Elena for creating the Carmelo and Mesa-Lago Fund for Latin American Studies, which, quote, is an endowment that will further ensure the long-term financial viability of the center and the continuing growth of the programs, many of which were developed by Professor Mesa-Lago, and that have made the center one of the best in the world. Thank you very much. Now to talk just a bit about how it has been to work with Carmelo, and perhaps talk about some of his work, I've asked Jorge Perez-Lopez, Carmelo's longtime co-author, to say a few words first.
Thank you, Scott, for allowing me for inviting me to introduce Carmelo Mesa-Lago. I do this with a great deal of pleasure and pride. I'm not going to do a traditional introduction of Carmelo. Many of you know him already as a faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh since the late 1960s, I believe. And of course, he's a distinguished professor emeritus of economics of Latin America at the Center. His website is quite complete about his resume. As Scott mentioned, he has published 93 books or monographs and over 300 articles and edited articles in edited volumes. So there's no real reason to talk about his scholarship. He's also received many, many, many awards, research grant professorships, sabbaticals, and has lectured in all continents, I think with the exception of Antarctica. I didn't see it on your resume, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has a lecture scheduled somewhere in one of those field camps soon. Instead of doing a traditional introduction, I thought I would just concentrate on 3 points about Carmelo's scholarship and humanity that mean a lot to me and are emblematic of the man and his work. First, how I came to know Carmelo. I actually met Carmelo indirectly in 1969 or 70. I was young then, and I had just finished my degree in economics at the State University of New York at Buffalo, and had entered into a PhD program. I knew relatively little about the Cuban economy at that point, but in a matter of a few months, in 1969 and 70, I found 3 incredibly well-written, thoughtful, evidence-based articles that blew me away, written by this guy called Carmelo Mesa-Lago, of course I had never heard of before. They were just incredibly well-done articles. I'm going to mention the 3 of them right now. I don't even remember them. Carmelo remembers them, and I just test his memory. One of them was The Revolutionary Offensive, published in Transaction, a publication edited by Irv Horowitz, that came out in 1969. The Economic Significance of Unpaid Labor in Socialist Cuba, published in Industrial Labor Relations Review. And then Availability and Reliability of Statistics in Socialist Cuba, which appeared in 2 consecutive issues of Latin American Research Review. As an aside, it is of course highly unusual for a journal to publish an article that has to actually take 2 different issues of a journal. When I've written articles of that length, usually the editor sends them back and says, cut it in half or forget it. In the case of Carmelo, the editor actually had the good judgment of breaking the article into 2 parts and published them in 2 consecutive issues of the journal. I dare say that those 3 articles by Carmelo influenced really my choice of study and research, much to the regret of my wife, who's here today and knows how much time I've spent on Cuban history over the years. Second point, I've dedicated most of my professional life at the Department of Labor and elsewhere to international labor standards issues. The premier organization in the world of labor standards, and one for which I have a lot of respect, is the International Labor Organization, which is one of the specialized agencies of the United Nations. For the last decade, the ILO has been following a global decent work agenda, which means, and I quote, opportunities for work that is productive and delivers a fair income, security in the workplace and social protections for families, better prospects for personal development and social integration, and equality of opportunity and treatment for all women and men. In 2007, the ILO instituted what they call the ILO Decent Work Research Prize, intended to recognize scholars who had made a significant lifelong contribution to support the decent work agenda. I was extremely proud when I learned in 2007 that Carmelo had been chosen as the first winner of this prize for his notable impact on Social Security and pension reforms in Latin America. He shared the prize with Nelson Mandela, of all people. You can see the level at which this prize is awarded. Let me just cite 2 sentences from what Carlos Tomala, who at the time was the Minister of Labor, Employment and Social Security of Argentina and President of the International Labor Conference in 2007, said about Carmelo when he awarded him the prize. Tomala said, and I quote, "The concerns that drive this distinguished professor have become policies that open the door to well-being, health, and dignity for all people in our societies, because the overwhelming achievements of Carmelo Mesa-Lago are made flesh in every citizen who is covered by social protection, especially the marginalized, because this economist shows us through his lifelong dedication that this work can be reached through economics as well." Third and last, Carmelo, despite all his personal research and prodigious amount of high-quality output, is incredibly generous with his time and with the research materials that he has collected. I have benefited many times from his comments and suggestions on a paper in progress or for getting hard-to-come information that he shares with me and with others. I'm not speaking for myself when I talk about his generosity in time. I've spoken to many of his students and many other colleagues, and everybody is of the same view that Carmelo is extremely generous in terms of helping other students. He definitely has a vocation to help others and also to teach that is well recognized. I could go on talking about Carmelo, but he has a presentation to make. There are also some words about Carmelo that are going to be said by the provost, and there's dinner, so I don't want to delay things like that either. So let me stop here. But before closing, let me recognize Elena Mesa-Lago, who is here also as well. She has supported Carmelo professionally and also personally for many years. She is a great person, a good friend, and a great support to Carmelo, and she deserves a bit of that credit as well. I don't know how many books, but she's been very active in many of these things. Anyway, I am delighted, Carmelo. I'm looking forward to listening to your chat, and thank you, Scott, for allowing me to say these words.
Now we want to give a formal PITT welcome to Carmelo, and I'm really honored that Provost Patty Beeson's here to give that introduction to him. In her role as Provost, Patty Beeson knows Carmelo beyond her role as Provost, because she's also in the Economics Department and knows him from that, so we can talk about that. I also want to note, as I said before, that we're very happy that she's able to be with us tonight, because she's been an important part of our center and supporters. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Scott, and really it's me who's honored to have been asked to introduce Dr. Mesa-Lago. As Scott said, not only is Carmelo one of our most distinguished faculty members. In fact, in the department, we always commented that he is the most well-known economist at the University of Pittsburgh. And you have to remember that his time on our faculty overlapped with Al Roth, who went on to earn the Nobel Prize, and even with that, Carmelo's name is the most recognized of any faculty member at Pitt, so in the department. And so it's an honor to introduce him as a distinguished faculty member, but really even more of an honor because I've had the pleasure of being a colleague with Carmelo for many, many years, more years than either one of us wants to admit. But it is my pleasure to give the formal introduction. And I just like to start by saying that Carmelo began his academic career in Havana as a professor of labor and social security at the University of LaSalle and University of Venezuela. And during this time, he also served as the head of the law department and a member of the board of directors of the Cuban Bank of Social Security. And in 1961, he spent a year as an assistant professor at the University of Madrid before he came to the United States to pursue his graduate education. First at the University of Miami, where he earned his master's degree, and then at Cornell University, where he earned his doctorate. He joined our Faculty of Economics in 1967, I believe, and he quickly worked his way up the ranks, earning promotions to associate professor 3 years later, to full professor a few years after that. And in 1980, he became the Distinguished Service Professor of Economics and Latin American Studies. Since 1999, he's held the title of Distinguished Service Professor Emeritus. Carmelo's been remarkably productive, as we've already heard, and widely honored through his career. He's the author of, as noted, 93 books, more than 300 articles. He's published in 7 different languages and in 34 countries. He served as a visiting professor, researcher, and lecturer in 40 countries worldwide. He's received research grants from the Ford Foundation, the Heinz Endowments, the Mellon Foundation, and many others. He's also been elected as an honorary fellow of the International Institute of Labor Studies, as well as a member of the National Academy of Social Insurance. Carmelo's received numerous awards and honors, including being named a finalist in Spain's Prince Asturias Prize on Social Science, received the National Association of Cuban American Educators Prize for the Best Cuban American Educator, and the International Labor Organization's Prize on Decent Work, which he shared, as mentioned, with Nelson Mandela in 2007. At Pitt, he also received the Chancellor's Distinguished Public Service Award and was the recipient of a bicentennial medallion on the occasion of the university's 200th birthday in 1987. Along with these contributions to his field and to the university, Carmelo has played an important role in the development of the Center for Latin American Studies, serving first as an assistant and associate director before he became the director and served as the director for 12 years from 1974 to 1986. A number of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of participating in an event that celebrated the contributions that CLAS, we call it now, has made to the university in its first 50 years. To a significant degree, these contributions have been enabled by Carmelo's shaping of the scholarly agenda of the center, as well as his work securing funding to support the work of that center long after he stepped down as director. When he stepped down in 1986, CLAS was viewed and still is viewed as one of the top centers for Latin American studies in the nation. And as he has noted, this achievement in his career is the one of which he's the most proud. His participation in this conference is particularly fitting due to his long scholarly record and contributions on Cuba's economic and social policies, starting with the appointments early in his career and continuing throughout his career, including his most recent book, Cuba Under Castro, which was published in 2013. And it's been called the defining survey of Cuba's economic and social policies during the presidency of Raul Castro. So it's really with a great pleasure that we welcome back a dear friend and colleague and one of the university's most distinguished professors, Carmelo Mesa-Lago.
Hard not to get it. Things that'll go up in a moment, yes? Should be. Yeah, in a moment that'll go away.
Wow. I am so grateful for all what has been said here. Really. The introduction by Scott, the generous words from Jorge, with whom I have worked I don't know how many years. He didn't say that we have co-authored two books, including this 2013. This is the co-author of a book with me. Many articles that we have been together working on Cuba for I don't know how long. And of course, the batteries. Thank you very much as always. I am also very happy that we are having this international conference on Cuba. I think this is one important step to return the University of Pittsburgh work on Cuba as it was in the golden years. Many of us have retired, but I hope that in the future there will be some people that are attracted here, the level of professors, continue this important work. Okay, now I have 40 minutes, and what I am going to do is I will try to give you an overview of Cuba's economic reforms in this period under Raul Castro from 2006 until today. Well, Raul accessed to power in 2006 after Fidel's very serious illness, and he has implemented many reforms to Cuban economic social problems. You have there a summary of what I was going to do. I am going to talk mainly about economic reforms. We can distinguish between non-structural and structural reforms. The second one are the most important because they change some important elements of the system. We have to make a selection because it's possible. There have been like 300 reforms, but the most important are the structural ones, and I've selected the 6 most significant. In each one, I will discuss progress, obstacles, and micro effects. Then very briefly, social reforms and political reforms, because they will be discussed at length in different panels during this conference. And then more in detail, the macro effects of economic reform, and finally, the funding. So let's start with the most important global reform, which is updating the economic model. That's quote unquote, that's the way that is mentioned in Cuba. And the current model in Cuba is transformed, not transformed, but upgraded, updated gradually. One important feature is the expansion of the non-state sector and markets, which have been the highest since 1961, when central planning was introduced in Cuba for the first time. And this year began a new stage in the process of reform with a very difficult step, which is the deregulation of state enterprises and more decision power transfers to management. Enterprises will be allowed to keep about half of their profits, and those enterprises that have consistent losses will be shut down. But there are obstacles as well. The model keeps supremacy of central bank and the state property over market and non-state property. Several Cuban economists consider an error to preserve central planning that has failed elsewhere, including Cuba, everywhere including Cuba. There are no specific yet on the plan and the market roles and the interaction between the two. And the Congress of the party in April of 2011 left many key aspects of the model vague, which still are today. This new stage, which I mentioned, as an important one, follows similar policies that were tried in Cuba in the 1970s and the 1980s and later were abandoned. And finally, there is excessive emphasis in avoiding concentration of wealth. I would give you some examples of this, which in my view generates significant disincentives. So what are the micro effects of this? It took almost 3 years to elaborate a preliminary proposal of the conceptual model. Now, I was supposed to do comparison with China and Vietnam, but then this presentation would have lasted 1 hour and a half. At the end, all of you will be sleeping. So I simply decided I don't have a space for this. But I just wanted to mention, very briefly, in a couple of places, that in China and Vietnam, there is a socialist market for many, many years, in which the private sector is quite advanced. For instance, basically, all agriculture is non-state. And also, you have a significant expansion of the market. And the planning system is not a centralized model, but it's a decentralized model with significant power at the managerial level. Okay, let me go into the second one, and this is very important because reforms in China and Vietnam began with agriculture, and it made a lot of difference, the agricultural reform that they implemented there. In the case of Cuba, the key point has been distributing state idle land to farmers, what is called usufruct, from the Latin use, and fruit, appropriation of fruits. And there are 2 laws, one in 2008, the other one in 2012. On the advances, the state keeps the land property and gives a small plots in usufruct to farmers, either individuals or to be co-ops or state entities. The farmer has the right to cultivate the land and appropriate the fruits, that's what usufruct is. The 2012 law was much more lax than the previous one in 2008. For instance, the plot size rose 5 times, now 67 hectares. The farmer can build homes and barns, plant forests and orchards. That was prohibited before. If the contract is not renewed The state assesses investment and reimburses the farmer. That was not existing before. And state microcredit and opening of bank accounts are available now. Relative working the plot can inherit usufruct after the farmer's death. Something also new. And the farmers can directly sell more of their produce to the market and to recipients. Acopio, let me explain what acopio is. Acopio is a procurement quota that is imposed on agricultural farmers, private farmers, cooperative, and the usufruct farmer, in which they have to sell part of the crop to the state, sometimes as much as 70% at a price which is set by the government below market price. So it operates a sort of tax. So Acopio has been reformed, and state marketing monopoly have ended in 3 provinces. And first, wholesale market was created this year to sell agricultural supplies. Now, what are the obstacles? Even being more lax than the previous law, the 2012 law is still too restrictive. For instance, you get 10-year contracts for individuals, which are renewable, but 25 years for cooperatives and state entities. The contract ends if the land is not used rationally. This is a kind of vague term that leaves a lot of discretion to the government. Or obligations are not met or for public and social interest. So there are a lot of ifs there. 77% of usufruct farmers lack experience in agriculture. The farmer must be linked to these 2 forms of cooperative, UBPC and CPA, that are the least autonomous co-ops, which something which have been widely recognized in Cuba, or linked to state farms. Both of them are inefficient forms of agricultural production recognized by Cuban authorities. So why to tie the usufruct to these 2 forms which are the least effective? Marabu is a weed, it's a bush actually, which is extremely difficult to eradicate. And it covers about half of the land. But state credit, microcredit, cannot be used to clean it. So it's kind of irrational that the first thing that you have to do is to clean Marabu, but then you cannot use microcredit to clean it, so you cannot start production. Farmers can hire only relatives or cooperative seasonal workers. And this is something which I find also illogical. Farmers can hire, investment is limited to 0.67% of the plot. The argument is to avoid wealth concentration. But one has to think that if the objective of this agricultural reform is to increase agricultural output, why are you limiting the investment that you can have? I mean, the idea is have as much investment as you can so you will increase production and also provide employment. And several key products are still subject to Acopio despite the reform of 2013. State microcredit is grossly insufficient, as well as input sold in the markets, in the large markets. And there are too many and very cumbersome rules. Before being an economist, I was a lawyer. And I can tell you that they are not easy. These laws are not easy. I will mention one later on. So what are the microfeds? In September 2013, which is the latest data that we have, there was 1.6 million hectares of land distributed to more than 174,000 individuals. And something positive. 90% of the land distributed was to individuals, despite the preference in the law for cooperative and state farms. In the period 2007-2012, cultivated land shares in the state and these 2 cooperatives, which are so dependent, declined. At the same time, shares of private farmers and also this CCS, which is a cooperative, which is the most autonomous, expanded. So this is positive. But I have to tell you something that I discovered just 2 weeks ago by a Polish digital form, Cuban Statistical Yearbook of 2013, is that it shows almost 50% increase in cultivated land area. Now, I think this is an error, because it cannot be that 1 year to the next you have this decline. Actually, I sent a message to a colleague friend of mine, Armando Noa, which is the best in agriculture in Cuba, and he has not seen this. And I am still waiting for an answer, because I don't have an answer to this. I don't. And now we're going to another very serious reform, which is the dismissal of unneeded state employees and the expansion of the non-state sector that began also in 2011. 1.8 million unneeded workers in the state have to be dismissed by 2015. And that's 36% of the labor force. Let me explain to you that Cuba, at one point, 2006, had the lowest open unemployment rate in Latin America and among the lowest in the world. But this was accomplished, and I wrote my dissertation, doctoral dissertation, but back in 1968 on this issue. They have they created a factory that needed 100 workers, but they would hire 200, and therefore open unemployment will decline, but at the same time we have increasing labor productivity and in wages. So all this became more and more complicated, because even during the crisis of the 1990s, they were not dismissed. And now they have to get rid of this because it's a three-minute race. But in order to provide jobs to the people, almost 2 million people that have to be dismissed from the state sector, you have to create non-state jobs. And this will have to be the self-employed, which is part of what I'm going to discuss now. Also in non-agricultural and service cooperative, and the usufruct that I mentioned before. State property is leased to co-ops that pay rent, while self-employed are the owners of the micro business. Prices are always set by the market and profit taking. All these non-state actors are allowed to sell, buy, and lease to the state, open bank accounts, and get state microcredit. According to the government view, and I think it's true, spurred by profit, cooperatives improve local and offer better services because they have an interest in saving money and improving production, etc. Some taxes have been temporarily suspended. Family employees can be hired without any limit. And wholesale markets that provide inputs to the self-employed and the co-ops have been created in 3 provinces, now with competition and freely set prices. This was done this year. And also this year, managing of state gastronomic enterprises are being gradually shifted to the non-state sector. So all these are positive things. But we have also heard it. Self-employed activities are too specific. Most are non-skilled, clowns, people taking care of bathing hotels, people selling fruits in carts in the street. I mean, I could go on and on. There are a few that are skilled, like accountants, which are play a very important role in Cuba. The real estate agents, insurance agents, and translators. But the bulk of these occupations is non-skilled. Very, very specific, very narrow. Cooperative approval needs 4 bureaucratic instances, and the final decision is made by the Council of Ministers. Now, you would think that the Council of Ministers in Cuba have enough to do to give approval to about 500 cooperatives. I mean, why they have to be so centralized? And then inspectors charge fines, close self-employed micro businesses. Recently, you have self-employed that were in the portals of Havana, Central Havana, and Old Havana. They were shut down. There were small saloons showing movies in 3 dimensions. By the way, the government doesn't offer that. They were shut down. There was a big discussion about this in the press, etc. And then you had a lot of people that were importing goods. About 30,000 people were living out of this. And they were selling this good cheaper than the price in the government hard currency shops. So you have a phenomenal variety of goods, and they were cheaper, but they were shut down. And that was a big discussion about this too, and some complaints. Licenses and monthly fees and taxes are many and quite heavy. Let me give you an example. There is a tax on the labor force, on the self-employed, and the rate increases as the number of your employees rises. So you are punishing the self-employed that are creating employment that the government needs in order to get rid of the 2 million people that are not needed. Why do you do that? So, for me, maybe as an economist I am very rational, but it doesn't make sense. And there is insufficient microcredit, and wholesale markets are important, but still in experimental stage. 1/5 of the self-employed fail and return the license. What about the micro effects? At the start of this year, there were more than almost like 600,000 state workers fired, but this was only 33% of the 2015 goal of 1.8 million workers. So that's way behind. They cannot meet that goal. Open unemployment, therefore, rose from 1.6, which is the figure that I mentioned for 2006, to 3.3 in 2013. And still, by the way, this is the lowest in Latin America, but in terms of the Cuban history, this is a reformer figure. And in the period from 2005 to 2013, the state sector fell from 80% to 74%, whereas the non-state sector grew from 20 to 26%. So this is expanding, but not fast enough in order to absorb all this surplus labor. By mid-2014, almost 500 cooperatives were authorized, but only half of them were operating. And now you have here a figure. This is in thousands. So you have in each of the years from 2009 to 2014, that's July 2014, the number of employers, the number tripled between 2006 and 2014, but still is 26% of the 2015 goal. You can compare this, which is the real, and this. So in order to meet that goal, they will have to increase the number of self-employed by 4 times in 18 months, which is impossible. Okay. I have to skip this because this is home buying and selling, but I don't have time. I will be happy to entertain questions in the discussion period. This is part of this. Okay. So now let me go into something quite important. There is a new foreign investment law of 2014. This was enacted, it began to be enforced last June. But I have to explain something first. In Cuba, foreign investment, domestic investment is 1/2 of the regional average. The average has been, in the last year, about 10%, and in Latin America, it's like 23%. It's also lower than investment versus GDP in 1989, when it was 25%. There's been a significant decline in this capital accumulation. And because of this, you have low economic growth. Oh, by the way, if you compare this with China, China and Vietnam has about half of GDP in investment, and Cuba 10. Officially have been recently acknowledged that they need anywhere from $2 to $2.5 billion annually to spur growth. Some news is that the new foreign investment law of 2014 have advances over the previous one in 1995. I'm going to go through these points here. First of all, it extends foreign investment to all sectors except healthcare, education, and the armed forces. There were a lot of exclusions before. There have been tax exemptions, our personal income, labor force, and some incomes. allows opening convertible currency accounts in foreign banks, and also to directly import and export. The authorization and denial of a foreign investment proposal has a 60-day maximum. Before, in the law of 95, there was no period, and sometimes it took years to make a decision. A foreign company may have 100% of shares. That was also in the 1995 law. In practice, what happened is only 49% of the shares were allowed, and the government kept 51%. So a very important test of the new law is whether they are going to have the possibility of having all the shares. Cuban legal persons are permitted to be investors, and implicitly also Cuban law. This is important because in China developed a lot in terms of, at the beginning, was investment by Chinese approval. And then guarantees are offered to foreign investors, including compensation for expropriation. And you, of course, have heard about the development zone in the port of Mariel, which is expected to be a magnet for foreign investment. And the problems. Well, the new law, unfortunately, kept a clause of the old law, which is that hiring and firing Cuban workers cannot be done directly by the investor, the foreign company or a mixed company, but it has to be done by a state agency. If there is a labor dispute with an employee, the company must submit it to the agency for a solution. Much more logical would have been to set rules, as most countries do, about how can you dismiss a worker rather than say, no, we will handle that. The foreign company still disperses salaries in hard currency to the government that in turn pays a fraction in pesos. The exchange rate is 25 pesos for $1 to the workers and keeps the difference. And this is a monster for investment. I heard just a couple of days ago that Brazilians have made a big point about this in terms of having investment in Cuba because they want to be able to hire, promote, and dismiss workers according to the law, of course. Foreign investors, it also prohibits investment by Cuban individuals, including self-employed. Why do you want to do this? It's the same thing as with the limitation of investment in the use of foreign investors can be expropriated for public utility or social interest reasons. And conflict resolution sometimes is left to local courts instead of international arbitration. Now let me mention something that happened recently, which is like you are doing something positive with one hand and then you do something negative with the other, which is a Canadian businessman that was a big investor in Cuba, in nickel, who does many other things. He was waiting 2 years for a trial, and he was sanctioned to 50 years in prison. I am not going into the issue of whether this guy was guilty or not. That's not my point. My point is that when you have enacted a new foreign investment law and you want to have investment, why do you do this? I mean, you can solve this diplomatically, you know, it's nothing strange to Cuba to do it on the ground, instead of, all this bad publicity in the world because of it. Well, I cannot mention microfacts because the law will enter in force in June, and it remains to be seen how the law is implemented in practice, so we have to wait for this. Now we're going to one of the most difficult reforms in Cuba, which is the so-called monetary unification. That's some norms and outlines were just published this year. I have to explain to you that in Cuba there are two currencies. The national peso, which is CUP, and the convertible peso, which is the CUC. And none of the two are traded international. In the international market, the convertible peso value is set unilaterally by the Cuban government. Cuban economists agree, and there is a consensus that the CUC, the convertible peso, is overvalued and is higher, slightly higher than the dollar. Now, the official exchange rate to the population is 25 pesos for one convertible peso. But in state enterprises is 1-to-1. Think about that. And of course, you have all kind of distortions here because the worker salaries are in pesos, but part of their, a significant part of their expenses are in compatible pesos. And then business efficiency, export and investment profitability cannot be assessed because, I mean, this money, it's not market or set. This is something arbitrarily set. Okay, but there are progress. First of all, there is a wide agreement that unification is necessary and should bring long-run benefits. The government began gradually to reduce the rate, so between 2012 and 2014, set the rate of 10 convertible pesos for 10 national pesos to 1 convertible peso. Imagine that I have been managing this for a long time and still my tongue gets confused. In several state enterprises. In March of 2014, guidelines were set for the enterprise sector, not for the population, for the enterprise sector. And the CUC convertible is to be devalued and disappear, whereas the national peso CUP will appreciate and be the future course. So we know that. The 0 day will start the process. An index of wholesale prices will calculate retail prices and revalue in national pesos all accounting prices, inventories, and investment. And the norm ensures the value of people, but I'm saying it because some people were aware that this conversion could result in significant losses. So that's the government promised that they won't be. So now we go into the okay, as I said before, I was a lawyer before being an economist, and this unification norm, it's not a law really, it's a set of guidelines. It's extremely complex. It includes equations. I have never seen a law with equations. I am not saying they are complex equations, they are very simple, but still, you know, how many people can read this? My goodness, I read 3 times some passages of the law because it's so complex, you got to believe it. I mean, if I cannot understand this, that I have been 55 years working on this, how many people in the place are going to understand? It's impossible. Still is unknown the unification timetable, the 0 day, we don't know when this will happen. The price index, we don't know. And the date to when the convertible peso in the price is unknown too. Unification for the population will be much later than the state enterprises. It's much more complex. Pablo Vidal, a Cuban economist, predicts that the process will start in January 2015 at the rate of 10 CUP for 1 CUC, which is what the government has been trying, I hope. And people are changing CUC by CUP because it's a rational thing to do. I mean, I want to get rid of the money, the currency that is going to be devalued. And sometimes there was so much demand that the exchanges in Cuba were left without CUP and they had to close down temporarily. And I think most people agree that inflation is going to happen. It's probable, but we ignore how the government will handle it. A couple of months ago, the government began to print a lot of CUP because they are anticipating that there will be a significant demand for that. Again, micro effects I cannot measure because the process has not started yet. These are only the first steps. Well, I am going to go very quickly through this. I am listing there all the structural reforms which are important, but I didn't have time to discuss. And then the spending and structural reforms, price reform, the completion of monetary unification, which is only started. I mean, it really has not. Decentralization of state prices and by regularization. Okay, and this even less than before. Social reforms, there will be a panel on Saturday on social reforms. not say anything about that. And political reforms, there will be more than one panel discussing this, but I just want to say, a few things. Important. Setting a limit of 5 years to high administrative and party posts. So Raul is in his second term of 5 years that will end in February 2018. Naming younger officials in key positions for the general succession. Some opening to criticism, not class notes, but still some opening to criticism. We have been discussing this in the morning with Roberto Lenier, etc. And the whole discussion that was here. More flexibility on migration. For me, this is the most important political reform because people are allowed to live, they have a passport. Several well-known Cuban dissidents have gone abroad, have talked, and have been in the press and in television, and they return to Cuba and nothing happened. I think this is a very important political measure. And then allowing cellular phones and limited access to internet, which of course it could create a generation as it expands. So now we go into the effects of economic reforms. And you have here, by the way, all the figures that I have given you are official Cuban figures. I mean, I have not, estimated. These are official figures. So you have here, this is the top rate, 12%, and you can go, it goes down to 1.4, and then slowly increases around 3%. But then this year, 2014, in the first half of the year, the rate was 0.6%, and it's projected to 1.4%. What happens, however, is that the most important economic activity takes place in the first half of the year, like the sugar harvest, the high tourist season, etc. So it's very difficult that they will have a rate higher than 0.6% in the second half. Actually, several Cuban economists are projecting 0.8. But another thing which is important is that you can see here the gold and the actual rates, and they are always below. And if they make 1.4, that's against the goal of 2.2. If they have 0.8, of course it will be significantly less. Now, Murillo is the vice president of Cuba. He is the person in charge of the implementation of the reforms, and very recently have been named Minister of Economic and Planning. So this guy has a lot of power. He said agricultural reforms have not led to the needed increase in production. Physical production fell or was stagnant in 3 of the last 4 years. As a percentage of GDP, was stagnant for 7 years. Based on the year 2005, the output agricultural index fell in most produce, except for 3. It was lower in 2013 than in 2005 and considerably lower than 1989. That was the year before the collapse of the Soviet Union and socialist country. The usufruct effects are very difficult to assess because, believe it or not, the figures on agricultural output by usufruct farmers are not disaggregated from the total. You have to guess where these people are because it doesn't fit into any of the categories that are published in the statistical yearbook. So how are you going to measure the effects of usufruct if you don't have a series showing what they are producing? And then the private sector share grew in total cultivated land and agricultural output, as I mentioned before, but surprisingly, it declined in terms of cultivated land by 49% in 2013. I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. And export and imports are quite important. Cuba had last year a deficit in the trade balance of goods, merchandise, not services, which are positive, of $9 billion. That's 12% of GDP. And that's the second highest in record in the history of Cuba, and of course under socialism too. And the share of agriculture and cattle exports in total exports fell from 0.5 to 0.4. To begin with, this is extremely low, it's less than 1 digit, and it's declining. On the other hand, food imports are necessary to cover 70% of domestic consumption, and they rose from 1.5 to 2 billion in 2012-2014. Finally, but not least important, there is a heavy trade and economic dependence on Venezuela. If there is problem in Venezuela, Cuba will be affected. So let me finish. Structural reforms have been generally positive. The most important under the revolution, by the way, and there are several colleagues in Miami that completely disagree with me on this. I have some fights already. They say that I see the reforms in a benign way. But also Cuba denied me the visa the last 2 times to enter Cuba. So I mean, I am always in the middle, you know. They are market-oriented. Strong regulations, obstacles, and taxes create disincentives and impede the progress necessary to achieve substantial effects. Despite lack of tangible effects, the reforms are slow. Raúl Castro argues they are quite complex, must be tested first, and should not be rushed to avoid costly error. This is very wise. It's doing exactly the opposite of Fidel, that was doing all these experiments at a national scope, and then if there was a disaster, it was a national disaster. So this is right. This is the right thing to do. But time and age conspire against him because he's going to leave the job in 4 years, and he will be 86. So, I mean, he doesn't have too much time, really. Updating the model keeps predominance of the central plan and state property over market and non-state property, which failed in Cuba and elsewhere. And it took almost 3 years to organize a team to elaborate a preliminary conceptual proposal for the model. I mean, guys, you have to go faster. The key reform is agriculture. Useful. It has required a second, more lax law, but still with important restrictions. If this was liberalized, as in China and Vietnam, it will increase agricultural output and reduce costly food inputs. China and Vietnam, the difference with Cuba is that contracts are for an indefinite period of time, and the farmer has the right to decide what to plow, what to grow, to whom sell the produce, no accopium, and the price is set by supply and demand. And that, in 6 years, made a significant change. This country that we used to have this hunger, periodical hunger, millions of people dying, and now are self-sufficient on food. And by the way, Vietnam is the second largest world exporter of rice and coffee, and sells coffee and rice to Cuba, which can be produced in Cuba. The new foreign investment law is more flexible than the previous one, but still keeps some of the old restraints. As it entered in force last June, the results cannot be evaluated. And then the unification of the dual currency is necessary and it should be beneficial. The reform does not reveal so far key elements of such unification. Reform show progress at the micro level, although results in many of them are below goals. For instance, the dismissal of unneeded state employees and the creation of non-state jobs. Macro indicators have not improved. GDP averaged 2% in the last 6 years. Agricultural output fell, stagnated, or grew little in 5 years after the use of fruit started. Food imports have grown due to poor agricultural domestic performance. Strong economic dependence of Cuba on Venezuela. By the way, I have estimated that trade, credits, investments, arrangement in terms of 100,000 daily barrels of oil, that represents about 20% of Cuban GDP. So it's not as strong as the dependence that Cuba had with the Soviet Union, but still it's very strong. So that is Venezuela economy continuing to go bad, that is going to affect Cuba. And then, starting on, Vietnamese reforms have been faster, more successful, and on the party rule. And this is very important. I mean, these guys still are on the Communist Party rule. You know? They are not on the capitalists. This could be a road to follow. The Cuban leaders argue they are not feasible due to huge diversities between Cuba and China, I don't fully agree with it. Some of them I do, others I don't. Particularly West Vietnam, that also have a blockade, the U.S. Finally, lack of substantial macroeconomic effects of the reforms should be an incentive to accelerate and deepen them, demonstrate their effectiveness, and improve living standards of the Cuban people. Thank you very much. Here, but they disappear.
Good.
Okay, so now, who want to, Scott?
Can you just call on your own questions, or?
No, yeah, I would love to have, I mean, this is very boring.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nah, too late. Superstar. You're already up there.
Yes, I would like to know, it was not mentioned information about the tourism in Cuba that is working right now and the gas industry that is proposed by Russia.
So they didn't hear.
There's two elements of the economy of Cuba that I would like to know a little bit more. One is about the tourism industry and the other one about the gas exploitation.
Okay. First of all, tourism is a very important source of returns in Cuba. I would say that after foreign remittances and Venezuela apply of Cuban professional services, it will be the third one. It was increasing every year, both in terms of number and also in terms of input. It basically stagnated, and then maybe I don't think this year will increase significantly over the previous year. So you have a situation like this, and then you, according to official figures, about only 58% of the beds are occupied as an average. So you have excessive capacity. Now, Cuba began to produce or increase the production of oil and as a byproduct gas. Gas increased tremendously because there was practically nothing before. Oil increased also significantly, but not as much. But it reached a peak about 2 or 3 years ago, and then have declined, or in the case of gas, probably stagnated. So you had a problem there. Cuba began a very important process of inviting foreign companies to export oil in high work. There were 3 cases in which they had like a Greek brought to human waters, but the 3 didn't find commercially profitable oil. So this is kind of stagnated. It doesn't mean that there is no oil, but so far they have not found it. The oil, 45% of the oil comes from Venezuela. Yes.
Carmelo, thanks for this really interesting presentation and very rich presentation. I want to ask you a little bit about the political consequences of the dismissal of state workers, right? Because it seems to me that if you dismiss 2 million workers and ask them to find their way in life, 2 things may happen, right? And one is either they don't find jobs and then you have an explosive social situation, or they do and then they do not depend on the state anymore for their own living. Whatever happens, that's an explosive situation for the government, right? Because they lose control of the population.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The problem is that the cost of this was enormous. I mean, think in terms of paying salaries, even if the salaries in Cuba are very meager, but still, by the way, real wages, I mean, adjusted for inflation, when you compare 2013 to 1989, they are at 27% of the base year. So there have been a decline of 73%. Purchasing power has declined very much. But still, this is a huge cost. I think the Cuban government miscalculated when they set the goal of they said first 1.5, then 1.8 million workers, because they need to dismiss these people. But at the same time, as you said, they have to get jobs, because otherwise you have an explosive situation. And what happened is that, as you saw, that they have like, 595,000 versus 1.8. And why? Because the non-state sector jobs are not expanding at the rate to absorb the surplus. And why is that happening? Because there are so many bureaucratic obstacles, taxes, disincentive. I mentioned the case of the tax that is going up as we, why do you want to do it? So the government has to flexibilize this. But in my opinion, this more, I am not a political scientist, but in my opinion, you don't have a unified leadership in Cuba in terms of this. Fidel control everything, but Raúl is different. I mean, there are all kinds of the party, people from Orthodox, the old guard, all this, and so you have conflicts there. Until these conflicts are solved, if they are, then they won't be able to move ahead because of all these obstacles. Yes.
Yeah, so my question is actually related. So I'm Eddie Molesky. I work on Vietnam and China, so I found your presentation really intriguing. So across all of these dimensions that you presented, if you sort of look at who's going to be the clear winner, and again you see that managers of state-owned enterprises are going to benefit. Almost across every one, they're going to be able to shed surplus labor. They're going to benefit from surplus profit keeping. They're going to get benefit from the monetary policy. And so I'm trying to figure out, why is it that they're going to keep on winning like this? Why is it that the state-owned enterprise managers are going to win? And is it ideological? Is it because the decision makers just really can't give up sort of the ideological tenets of communism? Or is it because state-owned managers are an important part of this reform process? And in order to get them to agree to some of the larger reforms, they're benefiting in some of these trade-offs along the way.
That's a very good question. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you are the manager of a state restaurant. The food is bad. There are exceptions. There are important exceptions, but in general, the food is bad. The service is awful. You see 4 or 5 employees there, and you are waiting, and nothing happens, and the prices are high. But there is a self-employed guy that is going to open a small restaurant in Cuba called Paladares across the street. Now, for what I have seen, there are exceptions too, but in general, the food is very good, the service is excellent, and the prices are either competitive with the prices in the state restaurant or even lower. So, if I am a manager, boy, I mean, I am going to lose my job. Because if enterprises that have subsequent losses, they will be shut down. So what do you think I am going to do? So this is an example, but if you project this to the bureaucracy in general, these guys are not very happy with this. And I also think that a lot of party leaders are not very happy either, because their power is going to decline. But we also have a problem of fear. It's not only that you have different factions, and you have the bureaucracy and other things, but it's a matter of fear. I mean, a lot of people think that if they start doing these reforms, which imply delegation of economic power, then they are going to lose not only power, jobs, and control. And this could become like a snowball that nobody will be able to stop. They are always thinking in terms of what happened in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, etc. So, what is the major? I think there is a combination of factors here, but quite frankly, what is the alternative? Are they going back to the model prior to the reform? That doesn't have any future. So they have to accelerate, but on the one hand, Raúl and other people are trying to push this, but on the other hand, you have all these problems and obstacles that are created by others, or the resistance of the people. Yeah.
Okay, I think your presentation was very interesting for me. I live in Cuba, as you know. I was the Dean for Public Administration School, and this is I am an economist too, and I love what you said, but I just want to add, if you let me
Of course.
something. In my point of view, the priority that we have to solve nowadays is the first problem that you have there is the dual currency. This is crazy.
Yes.
Because we have kids for 20 years. The society has changed a lot, and the picture is terrible. And I think this is the most important problem that they have to solve. Because person like me live in a CUP environment, like my colleagues. And really, you have to go ahead in different markets, no connections, and of course, you live in the black market that now changed as official market. Because my husband never know how I get food. But I know how because I learned for many years. And I don't want at this moment CUP, I don't want CUC, I want US.
O euro.
Yeah, I don't want any of this. This is
Mejor
what-
euro,
no,
mejor euro,
no,
pero
and
no
this is what happened today. That when you want to change, no, this is a problem. You know. Sorry, but the second point, just three ideas. The second point is that, in my point of view, you know, the reform is not like a package. And this process started in April 2011, a long time before. And in my point of view, because I used to work with the local levels, with the municipality level, with the leaders, with everybody, with the citizens, why not? They have to move together, not just the macroeconomics reform. The local level has to move at the same time. That is not happening. First, because you make decisions for everybody, all the municipalities, all the provinces, and are not the same. And you need to know that when you decide the self-employment, it's not the same in Havana, in Matanzas, or in Santiago. Huge difference. And for this reason, you have to reinforce the leadership and the local level to solve the real problems that the citizens have day by day.
Empowering the local level.
Yes, with a law. Because as you know, you are a lawyer, we have a municipality law before. And it cannot be because today I decide to give you more money or less money, no. It's because by law, the municipality has enough personality to go ahead to make decisions, and the assembly too. Like with Spain, do you remember what the ordenanzas were? Okay. And this is a big problem, because you have many rooms for new employees that you cannot identify, but these are the leaders at this level who need to go ahead. And this is my third point. I used to train these leaders in many ways, in many programs. And in my point of view, you need to change the mind. When you have had some kind of model for many years, you have managed the economy in other way for many years. Today, when you decide the enterprise can have more freedom, they don't know how. Today, when the minister has cannot manage the enterprise, they just have to make public policies or policies, they don't know how. Because now the industry minister, they don't have enterprise, and now they have to make policies, and they don't know how.
And they lose control of the enterprises.
Because they were training just to get sources and they were really directors,
Yes.
no ministers. And now they have to be ministers, and they don't know how to make policies. And Carmelo, and you don't have the leaders. because I don't want to be a mayor, no, really. But to be a president in one municipality, to be a president in one province, you need to know many things. You need to have many skills, and you need to have a good team. Not just some possibilities by law, but sometimes I say, okay, tomorrow they say, we will give you more money, I am sure they don't know what to do.
Okay, can I just want to make a point, which is I do agree with you that the most important structural reform is monetary unification. But this is also the most complex one. And if I were to, if you ask me where do you have to start, I would say agriculture. Because that's where China and Vietnam began. And if you change the environment and you provide the proper incentive, there will be a very significant change. You have to give more power. But then I do agree with you. You solve that problem, there will be no solution. Yes.
My name is Martin Dimitri. I'm a political scientist working on China, but I find Cuba fascinating. And I have a question about something that you mentioned, which is the future of rationing. So what will happen to the libreta in these plans for economic reform? And connected to that, what will happen to the existence of three separate prices for the same item? So one on the rationing, one in the CUP economy, and then sometimes the same item might be available in a dollar store. So there are plans for some unified prices eventually.
Okay. Rationing is not a good policy. Why? Because it's a universal. I mean, you want to secure at least a minimum of essential goods to the population, but what happened is that people who have a high income, and there are people that have a high income in Cuba, benefit from rationing. And so in 1995, the Cuban economists published a book in which they were proposing that instead of subsidies to goods, you give subsidies to people. Meaning, eliminate rationing and provide social assistance for those who are in need. Raúl has accepted that idea, and he gradually has taken out goods from rationing.
Like rum and cigarettes.
No, not only that. Much more than that. Well, if you wear not a cigarette, that's great. I mean, because these are not good for your health. But no, we are talking about essential goods in the diet that either have been taken out or they have been, the poor have been. And those goods are sold in the free market 3 or 4 times the price of rationing, because rationing is subsidized, heavily subsidized. Sometimes they are selling a stock below the cost. All right. For people who have foreign remittances, it's not a big problem. For people that don't have foreign remittances or they are not involved in some private or non-state activity, this is a major problem because they are going to suffer a lot. And the other thing, I invite you to attend the meeting of Saturday because I don't want to go into the social welfare issue. What happened to social welfare? Oh, by the way, so that you have an idea, rationing only covers 7 to 10 days of food per month. That means that the other 20, 23 days, you have to buy the stuff outside, meaning the agricultural markets, which prices are considerably higher, and they have not declined. The state hard currency shocks, they have returned a profit of 230%. That's why the state prohibited the continuum of goods, because they were making a tremendous competition. Or you go to the black market. Anywhere, if you are in the situation of those that don't have foreign remittances or are involved in some private activities, how do you eliminate rationing? I will acknowledge in the Party Congress in 2011 that the problem that was not discussed in the whole Congress was that rationing. And how you solve the problem, not unless you have a target social assistance, safety. So this I will discuss
Well, we're gonna have, there's a lot of questions. I'm really glad we have 2.5 more days to talk about this. I really want to thank you, Carmelo, and also Rodolfo Meñe for a great The conference participants or invitees are invited downstairs to the second floor. Thank you very much for everybody.